Why the Persian Empire never stayed dead. The Mongols may have been able to destroy the once mighty Persian Empire, but even after that, it wasn't quite finished just yet. In fact, the Persian people would go on to establish no less than 3 more empires after their first one was seemingly obliterated by Genghis Khan. But why was it so resilient? What is it about Persia, its history or its people, that made them continue rising again and again even after their lands were destroyed and their cities burned? Well, to start with, when Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes descended upon Persia in the early 13th century, they didn't encounter one single empire, but rather a patchwork of independent states. Sure, they were all ethnically Persian or followed the teachings of Zoroastrianism and spoke various Persian languages, but these states had been at each other's throats for decades. There was the Khwarezmian dynasty centered in Khwarezm, which itself had recently taken over the Central Asian territories of Transoxiana from the equally Persian Samanid Empire. Then there was the Zengid dynasty, based out of Isfahan, as well as several other Turkic and Arabic dynasties scattered across Greater Persia. This meant that the Persians weren't united against the Mongols, and so they fell one by one. The only reason that the Mongols didn't completely pillage the region and kill everyone was because they needed the peasants to grow food for their armies. So they employed a policy of deliberate genocide towards the ruling classes, while the common folk were allowed to stay alive if they paid their new Mongol overlords a hefty sum of money. The Shah of Khwarezmia was among the first to resist the Mongols, but even though he managed to defeat the armies sent to subdue him, he ultimately lost against a massive force personally led by Genghis Khan himself. And thus, instead of having a few strong Persian empires, the region was now ruled by the Mongol Empire, which in turn would be succeeded by the Ilkhanate following the death of Genghis and his grandson, Hulagu Khan. The Mongols would never fully adopt Persian customs like previous empires that had ruled over the region, nor would they leave the same kind of cultural legacy behind. Instead, they were a nomadic people who simply wanted enough stability to ensure that their armies could continue pillaging across Eurasia. After the Mongols, however, came another Persian dynasty known as the Muzaffarid Empire. It was founded by a man named Qutuz, who had been an official in the Mongol government and oversaw tax collection in Fars, a province in southern Persia. When the Mongols began weakening in the late 13th century due to internal strife and civil wars over succession, Kutuzov declared independence in 1314 and set up his own court in Shiraz, which would serve as the capital of the new empire. While much of northern and central Persia was still being controlled by the remnants of the Ilkhanate, Kosovo was able to conquer Fars and the surrounding regions. He also kept the administrative system put in place by the Mongols and even used the Uyghur language as the official language of his empire, presumably to avoid any potential opposition from the local populace. Most importantly, though, he established friendly relations with the Ottoman Turks to the west, as well as with the emerging Timurid Empire to the east, which both posed serious threats to the remaining Mongol rulers in Persia. In spite of this alliance, though, the Timurids would eventually conquer most of Persia from the Muzaffarid rulers. But even though it seemed like Persia had once again fallen to outside conquerors, the reality was far more complicated. You see, the Timurid Shah Timur was very much an expansionist ruler. He dreamed of reviving the old Mongol conquests of Genghis Khan and went on a mad spree of conquest throughout the Middle East and even into India. After his death, though, his empire crumbled, and a new Turkish dynasty called the Ak-Koyunlu, or White Sheep Turks, emerged in the north. They took control of the former Timurid heartland in Azerbaijan, while another Turkish tribe known as the Kara Koyunlu, or Black Sheep Turks, dominated eastern Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia. As the name suggests, the two tribes were bitter rivals, but it was the White Sheep Turks who would ultimately conquer the rest of Persia, reuniting the country for the first time since the days of the Sassanids. It was under the White Sheep ruler Uzun Hasan that Persia reached the height of its power during the 15th century. Yet even then, the country was divided. Uzun Hasan's brother, Yaqub Beg, broke away to rule the western provinces independently, and it wouldn't be until the reign of Ismail the Fierce that the country would once again be whole. Ismail proclaimed himself the founder of a new religion known as Shia Islam, which combined elements of Islam with the ancient Persian religion of Zoroastrianism. His followers, known as the Safavids, quickly gained the upper hand over the other Turkish tribes, and soon all of modern-day Iran, as well as parts of Iraq and Azerbaijan, were under their control. The Safavid Empire was remarkably tolerant of other religions, including Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and enjoyed a golden age of prosperity. Trade flourished and great works of art and literature were produced. Unfortunately, this relative peace didn't last long. By the late 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had grown significantly, and they eyed the Safavids' growing wealth with envy. They would end up going to war with the Ottomans on several occasions, not to mention battling the increasingly powerful Russian Empire to the north. All of this proved too much for the Safavids, and by the mid-18th century, the empire was on the decline. Now, technically speaking, the Safavids would remain in power until the early 19th century, when they were finally overthrown by the Iranian constitutionalists. However, in reality, the empire had effectively collapsed a century earlier when it was split in half by the Achaemenid dynasty. This was a new Persian dynasty founded by a military leader named Nader Afshar, who originally served under the employ of the Safavid Shah. During the wars with the Ottomans, Nader proved himself to be a capable commander, but he grew increasingly frustrated with the incompetence of the Safavid leadership, which caused him to rebel and overthrow them. His new empire would come to be known as the Afsharid Empire, or the Second Persian Empire. Despite its Persian name, though, the Afsharid Empire was actually founded by a member of the Afshar tribe, a group of Oghuz Turks who had migrated to Iran from Central Asia a century earlier. Nader himself was a devout Muslim, and unlike the previous Safavid ruler, he actively worked to suppress non-Muslim minorities and even expelled many Jews and Christians from his empire. He also built a formidable army, which he used to conquer large portions of northern Iraq, as well as the Central Asian territories of Khorasan and Transoxiana, bringing the former Mongol heartland back under Persian control for the first time in 700 years. Nader was eventually assassinated by his own son, but the Afsharid Empire would continue on until 1834, when it was conquered by the Qajar dynasty, which continues to rule Iran to this very day. So what exactly do we learn from all this? Why did the Persians keep coming back even after being nearly wiped out by the Mongols? Well, one major factor was that the Persians weren't one unified empire, but rather a collection of states, kingdoms, and tribes. This lack of unity prevented them from resisting outside invaders as a whole, which is why they kept getting stomped by the likes of the Mongols and the Turks. However, this lack of unity was also what allowed the Persians to keep coming back. Even when their homeland was burned and destroyed, they were able to survive by fleeing to the mountainous and sparsely populated regions of the Zagros Mountains and the Iranian Plateau, where they lived as nomadic herders and traders. From these regions, they were able to establish new governments and slowly rebuild their empires. Another reason why the Persian people kept coming back was their religious beliefs. Unlike the Mongols, the Persians did not believe in the concept of total destruction. Even when Genghis Khan razed their cities and murdered their people, the Persians knew that their culture and civilization would live on in one way or another. This attitude of resilience and perseverance is reflected in their art, literature, and architecture. For example, the famous poem Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, tells the story of the Persian kings from the very beginning of their civilization until the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. The poem celebrates the courage, strength, and wisdom of the Persian people and reminds them that no matter how difficult things get, they should never give up. Finally, we need to look at the natural geography of Persia itself. While the region does include some very fertile plains and plateaus, most of it consists of barren mountains and deserts. This means that if your city gets sacked and burned down, there are plenty of other places you can go to and start anew. Plus, with such a vast and inhospitable territory, it's pretty easy to hide and lay low if you're ever threatened by outside invaders. When we look at all of these factors combined, it becomes clear why the Persian people were able to survive and thrive despite being repeatedly attacked by outside conquerors. Their decentralized political structure allowed them to survive in hiding. Their religious beliefs gave them the strength to keep going. And their rugged terrain gave them somewhere to run and rebuild. None of these factors alone would have been enough, but together they formed a perfect storm that allowed the Persians to endure. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and come back next time for another adventure.